5 years after the outbreak, the bunker sounded different. The air system ran clean again. The welds over the breached shaft held. The door still whistled in a light wind, but less than before. Megan checked the greens and pushed a broken light into a bin for parts. I sat at the table with an open, blood-stained notebook and a pencil in my hand, comparing coordinates with old notes that I still kept. I had taken out these notes many years ago when my first bunker was flooded and I was looking for ways to survive. That was when I met Megan. The handwriting in the notebook was tight and neat. Each line had a location with one word after it: secured, cleared, or pending. The marks were careful. No one scribbles that way unless he is building a system and plans to keep it. I read the last page again. It said, Unit Sigma, status pending, no numbers, just that. The way the letters were written matched a few margin notes next to other entries, like the same hand had started a code and never finished it. I drew lines between those margin notes and a range I knew out past the bombed base. It was enough to narrow a circle. Megan laid a fresh bandage on the table and pointed at my ribs. I lifted my shirt and let her wrap me again. The gunshot wound from the breach had closed, but the bruising still pulled when I bent. She sealed the tape and waited until I looked her in the eye. No speech. Just that look. I knew what she wanted to ask without words. Why go? Why now? I told her plain. The man who marked this book tried to take our home. He is alive. He will build again if we let him. I said it was personal. She nodded once. I said there were practical reasons too. Those sites have food, medicine, parts, wire, filters, maybe a charge controller we can trust. If we take 2 or 3, we do not just hurt him. We make winter easier for us. She asked, what happens when people inside ask to follow me back here? I said, we save who we can and set rules for the rest. She said rules turn into orders, and orders turn into more fighting. I said I would go alone. She stood quiet for a long time, then pulled a small roll of rubber gaskets from a drawer and put them beside my pack. It was her way of saying yes with conditions. We set a plan. I would scout no more than 1 day out. I would move light, leave a rifle with iron sights, short shotgun for close work, 2 magazines for the pistol, bolt cutters, pry bar, headlamp, spare filters, 2 days of food if I had to wait out a patrol. I marked 2 cache spots on the ridge with small rock piles only I would recognize. We set a check-in window at dusk on 7.250 megahertz, 10 seconds only, no names. 1 plain word if I needed help. Red. If I said red, she would step to the decoy antenna in the far clearing and light it up so anyone hunting my signal would chase the wrong hill. We walked the door together and reset the steel sleeve she had welded over the hinge side. I ran my hand along the new seam, clean and strong. She caught my wrist and held it for a second. I told her I would be back before the second night. She told me if I was not back by the 3rd morning, she would move the seed tins and the medical kits to the crawlspace lockbox and then come looking. I said no. She said she heard me. It did not sound like agreement. I left just after first light. The valley under the bunker was clear of smoke for the first time in days. No drone hum, no footfalls. I moved east along the game trail and cut north at the old fence line. The book listed a site I knew as B12. The mark beside it said, cleared. Cleared in this book could mean stripped and dead. It could also mean seeded with bad surprises to keep people out. I moved slow and kept my steps on old prints so I would not leave a new path someone could read. The bombed base sat off my right shoulder as I crossed the middle ridge. A single twisted pole stood over the old motor pool like a marker. I kept it at an angle and did not silhouette against the sky. The wind shifted twice and brought the smell of burned fuel. Far off, a single infected wandered the cut, head bent, making no sound. I let it pass below me and did not engage. Noise brings friends. By midday, I reached the rise above B12. The cover looked like a piece of hillside with rocks set in a half circle. A small vent cap sat flush with the soil under a mat of vines. No fresh prints, no trash, no cord. The main door was at the base of a short cut through saplings. I watched 20 minutes. Nothing moved. I moved down and pressed my ear to the steel. Air passed inside. Not loud, a steady push. That meant at least one fan still worked, cleared but with power. I did not like that. The lock plate had been pried once years ago and set back with mismatched bolts. I stood in cover and put the pry bar under a loose edge. 2 slow pulls. The plate lifted a finger's width and gave me room to reach the inner latch. Someone had done this before. I eased the door just enough to see a slice of corridor. No light inside, no smell of old fire. I slipped in and eased the door closed behind me until just the latch caught. I let my eyes adjust and put the headlamp on the lowest setting, pointed at my feet. The first room was a small decon space, 2 lockers, a bench, a showerhead that probably never ran water. Dust lay even across the floor except for a line down the middle where someone had swept with a boot, careful to leave no prints. I touched the dust with a fingertip. It came up clean. That meant recent. I moved to the second door and listened. A soft sound carried through the metal. Not air, not rats. Soft, irregular taps. I opened it an inch. The light from my headlamp reached the start of a white corridor with pipes along the ceiling. 20 feet ahead, something pulled at a chain. It sounded like a low scrape on concrete. I closed the door again, set the lamp to off, and drew the short shotgun. I cracked the door and slid into the corridor along the left wall, moving heel to toe, muzzle down. At the bend, a figure slumped against a pipe 2 feet off the floor. A chain ran from a bracket to both wrists. The infected swayed and pulled without purpose. Its mouth worked at the air, and a small sound came out with each breath. Nails were missing, teeth down to nubs. It turned when my lamp gave a weak glow and pulled at the chain again, making the pipe creak. I held the shotgun low and angled the muzzle up, set at an angle that would not spray the pipe behind it. 1 round. It went limp and slid to its knees without a sound. I cut the chain so it would not ring if someone bumped it later and set the body aside. 2 more down the corridor, spaced like alarms. Someone installed them to make noise if a door opened. It was a simple system. It was effective against anyone who moved fast. I did not move fast. I took them both with single shots that did not break the pipes and eased their bodies flat so they would not roll and knock something else. Beyond the alarms, the corridor opened to a main room with metal racks and a low workbench. A small battery inverter blinked a single green light. That kept the fans on and gave a trickle to a line of dim bulbs that ran the length of the ceiling. A cage sat in the corner with a lock on it. Inside, a man lay wrapped in a blanket. I dropped to a knee and watched for a full minute. No movement around the door. No breath echo except the man's and the fans. I moved to the cage and tapped the lock with the pry bar to see if he would react. He did. He flinched, rolled, and looked at me through a dirty slit in the blanket. His face was sunken from hunger. He was older than me, maybe by 10 years. Beard grey at the chin. He spoke in a hoarse whisper and asked if I was with the transport crew. I said no. He nodded and did not move. I asked if anyone else was inside. He said a woman died 2 days ago. He said the men did not come yesterday. He did not know why. He said water was in a drum, and he had been rationing by capfuls. I asked his name. He said Grant. I asked what he did before. He said line work, poles, inverters, grounding. He said he could make a small array talk if it had anything left. He did not beg. He did not promise. He just said what he knew. I cut the lock with the bolt cutters and handed him my second canteen. He took a small sip and gave it back without being asked. This told me more than any speech. I told him we were leaving now. He asked about the chains down the hall. I told him they were quiet now. He pulled himself up with the bars, slow and stiff, and took 2 steps that looked like someone learning stairs again. I supported his elbow and kept the shotgun high. On the way out, I checked the racks for anything we could carry. 2 rolls of wire, a small box of fuses, 1 sealed jar of seeds. A narrow metal drawer under the bench held a first aid tin with 2 vials I could use. I put the drawer back as I found it. On the inner door, I burned a small triangle mark with a dot in the middle, same as the one we had seen at the base, but I carved it off-center at an angle only I would notice later. If the Warden's people came back, they would think their mark was already there. It might buy a day. We slipped out and moved into the trees. Grant walked better after a few minutes, like his legs remembered they were his. We kept to the cut behind the ridge and took the long run home so anyone following prints would lose us where the rocks broke the soil. Twice I stopped and listened. Once I thought I heard a drone far to the west. It faded. No shots. No voices. Just the steady beat of our steps and the sound of Grant's breath as it settled into a hard rhythm. I did not call in on the radio on the way back. I waited until I saw our slope and the solar frames through the trees. I keyed the set for 10 seconds, spoke one word in a low voice. Returning. I said nothing else. Megan answered with 2 clicks and went dark. We reached the hatch just before dusk. Megan opened from inside with the shotgun in her hands and eyes flat with focus. She looked at Grant and then at me. She did not smile or frown. She stepped back to let us in. I closed the door and threw the bar. The bunker felt steady again. I put the jar of seeds on the table and set the 2 vials beside it. Grant stood with his hands at his sides like a man in a stranger's living room, waiting for instructions he did not want to ask for. Megan gave him a cup of rice soup and a slice of bread and told him to sit on the bench by the wall. He sat and ate slow. He did not look around. He kept his eyes on the food and the floor. We kept watches that night in case the transport crew came looking. I took the first. The radio stayed quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the inverter and the weak whistle under the door. In the second hour I stepped into the corridor and checked the welds over the breach again. No give. No dust falling. I ran a finger along the seam. It was rough where I had to work fast during the siege. It held anyway. Before sleep, I marked B12 on our map with a thin pencil line and wrote the word seeded beside it. Megan looked at the word and closed her eyes for a long second. She said she hated whoever thought of chaining the infected like bells. I said me too and meant it. Grant slept sitting up. He set the empty cup neatly on the floor beside him as if he expected to be told to clear it. In the morning, he woke slow and quiet. I handed him a clean shirt and told him to keep it. He nodded and asked what we needed fixed first. It was a good question. I pointed at the inverter rack. One bearing squealed when the load jumped. The charge controller threw a fault when the clouds rolled in. He ran his hand down the cabinet and listened. He said he could make it smoother by night if I had grease and a spare belt. I did. He asked what he owed. I said his debt was paid when he drank 1 cup and no more when he was dying of thirst. He did not argue. We kept our routine tight that day. Megan tended to the beds and cut the cracked panel from the array. I hauled the small windhead out of storage to see if there was enough breeze to matter. Grant pulled a side panel off the inverter cabinet, cleaned dust from a cooling fin with a toothbrush, and oiled the squeal until the sound dropped to a low hum. The bunker sound changed again. Better. He did the work without asking for a break and without telling stories. That was another good sign. In the late afternoon, I opened the notebook again and ran the ledger against my thumb drive. Some status notes in the margins lined up with dates on a transport list I had saved from an old county tender site. That gave me a cadence. Every 4 days, the Warden's crew moved between a set of bunkers in a loop to strip parts and enforce control. B12 should have seen a visit the day before I arrived. It did not. Either they were busy somewhere else, or we took it in the window between crews. That kind of luck does not repeat. I set the radio to the low band and scanned through the range. At dusk, a clear voice cut through the noise. The cadence was military clean. The words were simple. Stand by, consolidate, hold, then silence. It repeated 5 minutes later with a new code at the end. It was not random talk. It was a schedule. Megan came to the table and listened with me. After the third repeat, a different voice spoke on a different channel for less than 2 seconds. It used my name. Not a nickname. My name. The word hung in the room, and then the speaker went dead. No way that was chance. I killed the radio and sat very still. The last time my name came over a set was on day 1 of the Old City Fall, when a hospital clerk yelled lists of family names into a hall full of stretchers. I did not like hearing it again now. Megan watched me without speaking. She knew what it meant. The warden was alive. He had heard my check-ins once or twice during the siege. He had a voice he used for pressure, and a voice he used for order. The second one had just spoken. We slept in shifts again. My watch ran to near dawn. I thought about what comes when you go looking for trouble instead of waiting for it to find you. I thought about the dam they blew to flood the valley in the first month and the way our old bunker filled and held, steady and loyal, until the water reached the roofline and the pressure cracked the seam. The book in front of me was not just notes. It was a plan that hurt people like us, on purpose to make the map simpler for men who love neat lines. I said to the empty room that I was done letting those lines push us around. When morning came, I told Megan I was going out again. She did not ask where. I showed her the pencil circle near the farm ridge and said R3, pending. If we left it alone, the 4-day loop would land there soon. It would be a harvest. If we got there first, we could end that pattern for at least 1 point on the map. She listened, then pointed at our food shelf and our ammo tin. She said we had enough to last through winter if we kept our heads down. She said no one would blame us for staying dark. I said that I would blame me. She looked tired and sad and strong all at the same time. She told me to be back by second night or send one word. Red. Before I left, she checked my bandage again and slipped 2 small vials into my side pouch. Antibiotics. She said I would not get a second chance if a nail in a bad hallway caught me wrong. I told her I understood. I told Grant to keep his hands on the inverter and his mind on the fans. He said yes in a way that sounded like a promise. I believed him. I stepped into the trees and cut west around the ridge to avoid the high ground where a drone could silhouette me. The trail to R3 wound through scrub oak and brushy cedar and then dropped into a valley with an old farm road at the bottom. A grain silo stood alone on a rise with a tin roof half gone. The bunker door would not be in the open. It would be under something a farmer could explain. A false floor in a silo makes sense. I moved towards it with my eyes on the places where a man would wait if he wanted to watch the approach. At 50 yards, I saw the first sign. A new scratch on an old hinge on a side panel of the silo. Fresh metal under rust. That meant a hand moved it this week. I circled left and found a second mark near the ground where a bar could be put through to lift a cover. The cover was not heavy in absolute weight, but it was awkward. If I lifted it wrong, it would ring the edge and announce me. I slipped the pry bar under the edge and coaxed it up slow until it cleared the lip. The air that rose from the gap was cool and stale. It smelled like a room that had been closed but kept alive. I lowered myself down and set my feet on a ladder that had seen better years. I tested each rung with my weight before committing. 2 rungs crumbled under thumb pressure. I avoided them. At the bottom, a short hallway bent left into a room with concrete walls and a workbench pushed against one side. A single low light burned at the far end. Quiet footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper inside. More than one set. Regular pattern. Not panic. A schedule. I darkened the lamp and moved along the wall, hand on the cool concrete, counting doors. The second door had a window cut into the top with wire mesh inside the glass. Through it I saw 3 people at a table with a handful of tools and a stack of filters. 2 adults. 1 small boy. The adults moved slow and careful, swapping a gasket while a man in a grey vest watched from a chair near the door with a rifle across his lap. He looked bored, which can be more dangerous than angry if you catch it wrong. I stepped back and mapped the hallway in my head. 1 guard in the room, 2 more somewhere else from the steps I heard. A 4th likely near the main door below. I could cut power and lock the heavy door from this side if the old scheme matched the prints on the wall. If I did it clean, the guards would be stuck inside steel boxes with no air feed except what I let them have. It would end fast if I did not make a mistake. I found the small control niche behind a panel that had not been opened in years. The hinge made a dry sound when I moved it. I winced at the noise and waited. No reaction. I read the labels under a layer of dust and picked the 3 I needed. Door seal, branch feed, bus isolate. I pulled the first 2 and then eased the 3rd halfway and waited. A soft clunk sounded under my feet. A heavier thud followed from the far hall. I closed the panel and moved to the first door. Inside, The man in the vest stood fast and jerked at the rifle. The boy froze with a filter in his hands. The woman at the table reached for the child without looking away from the gun. I did not give the guard time to point. I stepped forward and drove the shotgun muzzle into his ribs and fired once at an angle that kept pellets inside him, and not through the wall into someone I could not see. He dropped, and his hands opened. The rifle fell and hit the floor with a dull sound. The woman flinched but did not scream. She pulled the boy to the wall and covered him with her body. I told them to stay low and quiet. My voice sounded normal. That surprised me. Footsteps pounded in the hall. I dragged the guard's body into the corner and kicked the rifle under the table. I stepped to the side of the door and waited with the shotgun high and the pistol at my hip. The first man through hit the wire mesh window with his shoulder and bounced. I fired through the door when his muzzle crossed the opening. The shot took him, and he fell back into the hall. The second man stopped short and fired 2 rounds into the metal that rang like a bad bell. I crouched and slid the pistol around the edge and squeezed once. The round hit concrete. He retreated. I heard a yell for air and a curse at the door. The seals had set. The room trapped them on the wrong side and gave me a minute. I turned to the table. The woman stared at me, eyes clear and focused. She asked if I was here for the boy. I said I was here to end the rotation and make sure no one came to collect parts again. She nodded once like that answer made sense. She asked if I had a nurse. I said no. She said she was one. Her name was Ivy. She said a cut on the boy's ankle had started to smell bad. She said she could fix it if we had clean water and a better bandage. She talked like someone who was used to making hard calls with no help and no sleep. I told Ivy to keep the boy low and handed her the shotgun. I kept the pistol and the pry bar. I moved back to the control niche and pulled the branch feed down another notch. The fans slowed. I counted to 30 and then raised it again. The men in the hall would feel the change and worry. Worried men make mistakes when air feels thin. I used the pry bar to wedge the latch on the second door and then kicked it hard. It opened a hand's width and caught. A man inside stared at me through the gap with a look that said he did not expect to be on this side of a trap. He raised his rifle. I shoved the door against it and he lost his grip. The weapon fell and clattered. I reached through and grabbed his vest and pulled him into the metal and stunned him with 2 short strikes with the bar. He slid down the frame and went quiet. I dragged him inside and tied his wrists with his own belt. The second guard down the hall had given up on the door and started firing through the hinge. The metal spat flakes into the room like sand. I put 2 rounds into the wall where his muzzle flash showed, and then moved to the opposite side so he would not track the same spot. He stopped. I heard 3 hard coughs. The sound of air changed again. That told me the seals worked. I waited until the silence got heavy, and then stepped out into the hall low and fast. He had dropped to a knee to aim under the door crack. I put 1 round into his shoulder, and he spun and fell. I kicked the rifle away, and put a knee into his arm to keep him from grabbing. He reached for a knife. I took it and slid it down the hall. I locked the corridor door with the manual lever and stepped back into the first room. Ivy had the boy's ankle propped on a rag, and was already cleaning the skin with a strip of gauze dipped in boiled water from a small kettle on a burner I had not noticed on the shelf. She moved fast and clean. She asked if we were leaving. I said soon. I would not carry 3 today. I said I would set a signal schedule so they could call me in a true emergency without lighting a beacon for every bad ear in the county. She understood. She asked if she could send a note to someone. I said I would not carry names. She nodded with a face that showed she had expected that answer. We kept it simple. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short on the low band at dusk. Only once. Only if danger. Any more than that, and I would pull the antenna out by the roots. She agreed. I told her to keep the air filters moving and the water clean. I told her to hide food like it was money. I told her to teach the boy to strip a bolt, clean a thread, and count beans like they were bullets. She said she already had. On the way out, something tapped near the silo cover. I froze and listened. A small piece of metal rolled across the concrete above and hit the lip. Then a voice called a name that was not mine. The accent was close to the one I heard on the radio the night before, but lighter, younger. The words were wrong for a country kid. Formal. The voice called again. A shadow crossed the gap over my head. I motioned Ivy and the boy back down the hall and slipped into a side niche. The shadow moved away. A minute later, a single shot cracked the air at a distance. A test shot. Not at us. A signal to someone else. I did not rise until the sound died out, and the silence returned long enough to hear flies. We waited 10 more minutes and then went up one at a time. I eased the cover down with the pry bar and brushed the hinge mark with dirt. We crossed the field at a low angle so from the road it would look like we were walking the fence line and not leaving a hole in the ground. 200 yards out, I broke off and pointed Ivy and the boy to a dry creek bed that would take them to the farm stand on the old highway where I had left water in a drum years ago. I said to take one sealed bottle only and leave the rest for the next person. She nodded and took the boy's hand. She did not ask where I lived. She did not try to follow. She gave me the shotgun back and walked away without looking over her shoulder. That also told me more than any speech. I reached home before full dark. Megan opened the hatch and stood aside. She smelled like soap and solder from a day of repairs. I put the wire, the seeds, and the vials on the table. She looked at the vials first, then at my hands, then at my face. She did not ask if anyone died. She knew the signs by now. Grant sat cross-legged on the floor with the inverter panel open. He had cleaned the bearings and tensioned the belt so the squeal was gone. He showed me how he cut a thin shim from an old food can to line a worn guide. It was a small fix that would matter when the cold came and the rubber stiffened. I thanked him and meant it. He nodded and put the panel back on without a word. We ate in quiet. Rice with a handful of beans, a sliver of dried meat. Megan picked at her plate. After we cleaned up, I set the radio for our check window and listened with the volume low and my ear close. At dusk, a faint pattern tapped through. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. Ivy had found a way to send the signal with what she had. It meant she was safe for now, and understood the rule. I tapped a single short in reply, barely above noise floor, and closed the set. An hour later, another signal cut across the band. Not Ivy, not a code. Voice, calm and controlled. The same voice that left a recorder by our fence after the siege. The warden spoke as if he were sitting 2 rooms away from me. He said the region needed structure again. He said men who thought they could defend small holes forever were just postponing a larger failure. He said mercy without order was a slow death. He said I had a talent for structure and that made me valuable. He said I had a wife who deserved more than ration math and always looking over a shoulder. He spoke like we were partners who had argued and just needed to find a middle ground. I turned the set off. I did not answer. Megan stood at the door with her hands in her pockets and her shoulders set. She asked if it was him. I said yes. She asked if I believed anything he said. I said I believed he believed himself. That is more dangerous than a loud man with a sawed-off plan. We set our night routine again. 2 on watch, 1 asleep. Grant took a short middle watch for the first time. He moved quiet and kept his eyes on the gauges instead of the door. I watched the vent camera through half the night. Nothing moved but a fox and the wind in the trees. In the morning, I put the seeds in the locked box under the back rack and moved the wire to the shelf marked for outside work. Megan and I did not talk about leaving again. The talk had already happened. The die was cast. I rechecked the ledger and traced another circle where my old procurement notes showed a cold storage annex that might still hold filters. The status in the book said cleared. I did not believe that word anymore. I said I would take a look after I checked on Ivy's site in 3 days. Megan said to bring back anything with rubber in it. Gaskets, seals, hoses. She held up the small roll of gaskets she gave me when I left and said it had felt like a goodbye gift. I told her next time she should give me 2. Grant asked if I wanted him to stay here once winter set in. It was the first time he made a suggestion about the future. I told him I would not promise anyone a bed for life. I said if he kept the power steady and did not bring strangers to the door, he had a place for as long as the fans ran. He took that in and said it was enough. I went outside to check the array. The sky was clear and the wind light. No drone hum. A hawk sat on the far pole like a sentry. I stood and watched it for a minute. It looked back and did not fly. Small signs like that add up inside a man faster than he admits. Back at the table, I laid the notebook flat and turned to the last page again. Unit Sigma. Status pending. No numbers. The margin notes next to 3 other entries used the same abbreviations I had once seen on a civil defense map in the county assessor office. Node B. Transfer south shaft. The notes were not meant for strangers. They were for men who already spoke the code. I traced the range with my finger and marked a place to the south of the bombed base, where a low ridge hid an old fiber run. If I were the warden and I wanted a hub, I would pick a place like that where lines intersect and no one who does not love maps would notice. I closed the book and sat back. My ribs ached. The pain was clean and simple. It helped sort thoughts. I told Megan my path for the next 2 days. She said to take a second canteen and the small stove. Nights were cooler now. She said to keep my hands clean when I worked a wound or a door. I said yes. She kissed me and did not say be careful. Words like that do not change outcomes. Work does. I slept 3 hours and left before the sun cleared the ridge. The ground crunched under my boots where the first frost had set in the shadows. I cut south along a game trail and then east through a band of young pines where the earth stayed soft. I reached the high ground above R3 near midday and lay behind a blowdown to watch the silo and the 2 outbuildings that still stood. No smoke, no people in the open. A small flash at the corner of the barn door told me someone had a mirror or a scope on a nail. I did not move until I knew if the flash was wind or hand. It did not repeat. I eased past and moved toward the silo along the low side, where the grass lay flat from old traffic. I kept my weight on the edges of my feet so the grass would not show a new line. The cover over the bunker entrance had gained a fresh scrape on the hinge since yesterday. That meant a guard had checked the hole after I left. I listened at the gap for a full minute, counting the fans and the pattern of footsteps. Fewer steps now. I dropped in and closed the cover halfway so light would not silhouette me against the opening. Inside, the air was warmer and the small room smelled like boiled water and bleach. Ivy stood with her sleeves rolled and a cloth mask over her nose, tying a proper bandage around the boy's ankle. The boy watched her hands and did not flinch. That told me she had already earned his trust the hard way. 2 adults sat on a bench nearby with their backs straight and eyes steady. Not cattle, people. You can tell the difference in seconds when you pay attention. I told Ivy I wanted to see the rest of the bunker. She pointed at the hall and handed me a set of keys she had taken from a dead man's pocket. The first key fit the lower door on the right, which opened into a room that had once been a tool bay. 2 metal shelves ran along one wall. A small crate on the floor held filters in their paper sleeves. I counted. Enough for a year if used right. A small tin under the shelf held razor blades and thread. I pocketed the thread and left the razors. Waste not. The next door opened into what had been a sleeping space. 4 bunks, 2 blankets, 1 lumpy pillow. A small book with damp edges lay on the floor. I picked it up and flipped a page. It had addresses and numbers written in a neat hand, but the pages were blank after the 4th line. I put it back. The last door on the left was locked from the outside. I unlocked it and stepped back, then opened it with the pry bar from a safe angle. No one inside. Just a set of racks with empty boxes that had once held parts. The labels on the boxes matched entries I had already marked on my thumb drive as items that move fast in the first year. Fuses, gaskets, belts. The men who stripped this place knew what they were doing. They had not cleared it all. The fans still ran. I went back to the main room. Ivy had the boy on a stool with his foot elevated and his eyes closed. She asked if we were staying or leaving. I said I was not taking people out today. I said we would set rules and tools and leave them a better path. I said I would come back with parts and maybe a radio, if I could spare one. She nodded and did not argue. She did not ask to leave with me. She belonged here now, not forever, but for long enough to make a difference. We wrote the ritual down on a slip of paper and taped it inside the cupboard behind a stack of cups so no one would read it by accident. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short at dusk only. If used, do not repeat the next day. Never say a name. Never say a number. If a stranger brings a signal box and claims to be me, ask him to say the word we agreed on. We chose a simple word that would not come up by accident. We both spoke it once to lock it in, and then never again. When I climbed to the cover, I heard engines in the far distance. Not close yet. A convoy, not a single truck. You can tell by the way the sound rides low and slow, and then fades, and then returns as it snakes through turns. I warned Ivy and told her to keep to the schedule no matter what. If men appeared and made offers, she was to stall and call me only if they crossed a line she could not hold. She told me to be ready for more wounded next time. I said I would bring dressings and more boiled cloth. She said to bring a second pair of bolt cutters too. We both smiled once. Quick, not for joy, for understanding. Outside, the light had dropped under a high thin cloud. I moved to the far fence and stayed there until I hit the low ravine that runs like a scar through the field. The sound of engines grew and then dropped. I lay flat and waited. A truck passed on the old road with a clatter of loose metal in its bed. 2 men on the bench seat, one with a cap pulled low, the other scanning the fence lines with a half-raised pair of binoculars held one-handed. Sloppy, not the Warden's main crew. A feeder run. I let them pass. I made the ridge by late afternoon and came in from the north to throw off any tail. Megan opened the hatch and shut it behind me. She had the small stove lit and a pot simmering. She set a cup in front of me and told me to drink. I did. When I was done, she took the cup and set it in the washpan and then told me to sit again. She put her hands on the table and spoke in a low voice. She said we were now responsible for people we had never met until yesterday. She said that if we keep clearing bunkers, people will come here. She said the first one will be a blessing, and the 5th one will be a weight we cannot carry. She was not wrong. I told her we would not hang a sign. We would not tell anyone where we sleep. We would build a dead drop on the far creek and hide notes under a stone so no one ever came to the door. We would set caches in logs and let word travel that way instead of through mouths. She said that still puts us on a map someone else can read. I said that is true. I said the other option is to sit here and wait for the next siege. She said she hates both options. I said me too. Then I told her the third option is to make our map stronger than his. She looked down at the book and then back at me. She put her hand flat on the page and pressed it like she was pinning a bug. She said, "Fine, do it right or not at all." At dusk, Ivy's signal hit the band at the agreed time. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short, clean. I answered with 1 short pulse and went dark. 10 minutes later, a second voice tried the channel with a call that sounded polite and official. It said it had medicine for any who needed it and news of a safe road to the east. It asked for a count of heads. I did not answer. The voice kept asking in the same calm tone for 8 minutes and then went silent. Megan and I sat without speaking for a while after that. Grant sat with his back to the inverter, listening to the fans, like a man who wants to be useful and knows the best way to do that is to stay out of a private moment. The next morning started with a clear sky and a hard frost in the shadows. The door whistled when the wind came from the west. I packed a smaller kit and checked the lever rifle twice. Megan rolled the map and slid it into the tube I use when I expect to crawl. Grant watched the charge controller settle into a steady pattern and nodded, which was his way of saying the repair held. Ivy's signal did not come at dawn, and that was good. Silence meant the ritual was intact. I told Megan I would swing past the quarry on the way to the cold storage annex. She did not like that detour. I said the quarry breaks sound and kills rotor wash. If a drone followed, the walls would scramble the approach. She set her jaw and said fine. She reminded me that fuel is not a bottomless well. I said I would travel on feet and save the can for winter emergencies. She slipped an extra roll of bandage into my side pouch and told me to bring back rubber and a belt if I saw one. The trail to the quarry wound through a cedar stand and then dipped along a dry creek that had eaten into the clay. I moved fast through the open stretches and slow at the edges. The quarry was a bowl with broken stone shelves and a flooded center that stayed cold even in summer. Sound bounced in odd ways down there. You could not judge distance by ear. That worked for me. I found a perch 2 shelves down, with a view of the main approach and set a decoy on the upper rim. a rag tied to a branch in a way that would catch a breeze and make a shape a bored scout would look at first. Then I sat on the stone and waited with my back against the wall and the rifle across my knees. The cold soaked through my pants fast. It kept me alert. The first sign was not sound. It was a small flicker of red on a rock across the bowl. A drone lens blinked once and then steadied. The machine floated just above the rim, then dipped, then rose. The pilot did not understand the bounce in there. Good. I let it pass under me, and then stayed dead still. 10 minutes later, a man appeared on the rim above the decoy rag and lifted a small set of binoculars. He wore a dark jacket with the sleeves cut short and a scarf at the neck. 2 more men crouched behind him. One held a short rifle with a light mag. The other had a hand radio and a pair of bolt cutters hanging from a strap. The first man scanned the bowl and the shelves and then pointed at the decoy. He sent one of the others to check it. I slid the rifle up and found the leader's torso in the front sight. The shot would travel at an angle through bone and stone and alert the drone pilot. I wanted a cleaner start. I waited until the man with the bolt cutters stepped past the decoy and revealed the empty shelf behind it. He turned to report and lifted his hand in an open palm. I took the shot when the leader's head tilted to listen. The round struck the scarf line and dropped him into the brush. The rifleman flinched and fired wild into the shelf above me. Chips fell. The drone jerked and rose and spun. I worked the lever and shot the radio man in the thigh. He fell and yelled into the set, which is the worst thing a man can do inside a bowl. His voice slapped itself into echoes, and the pilot lost direction. More men appeared on the far shelf. 4, maybe 5. I did not stay to count. I slid left along the wall and dropped to the shelf below using a grappling line I had set years earlier for a different job. I crossed under a ledge and waited for a breath. The rifleman pushed toward my last shot and leaned into the gap. I clipped his shoulder with a quick round and sent him spinning. I did not chase the shot. I put 2 soft foam plugs over the drone's intake on the next pass. The pilot tried to climb. The drone dipped and hit the wall with a pop and fell. The pilot cursed into the set with a steady calm that did not match a panic. That calm told me the voice belonged to someone who liked pressure. The man said to tighten the net and keep eyes on the northeast climb. I slid down another shelf and moved through a cut where water had carved a narrow slot. At the mouth of the slot, a man stood with a pistol and a face too young for that gun. He aimed high. His finger shook. He said to drop the rifle and put hands on the rock. He said his title without knowing how it sounded. He called himself the new Warden. I had not asked. I raised the muzzle as if to lay the rifle down, and then pushed forward into the pistol as I moved. The shot went wide and hit stone. I slammed the rifle stock into his wrist. The pistol fell. I pushed him into the wall and pressed my forearm into his chest until his eyes rolled. He slid into a sit and blinked at me with hate and shame mixed into a single look that would last a lifetime if he had one. He wore a chest rig with 3 pockets and a hand radio. I took the radio and the folded paper behind it. The paper had a 2-week schedule and a list of sites to hit. One entry matched my notes for the cold storage annex. Another carried the word hub in a hand I knew. The Wardens. At the bottom, a final line repeated a phrase that had followed me across years. Unit Sigma. Transfer pending. I left the boy breathing. I do not shoot a young man who has already dropped his gun unless that man picks it up again. I kicked the pistol deeper into the slot so no one would find it fast, and then moved along the wall. 2 more men came down a different shelf, not careful. I slid into a pocket and let them pass, and then climbed the rope I had used to reach the shelf. The rope scraped and left a mark. I cut that section and tucked it into my pack so no one could follow my fiber home. I reached the rim and ran the game trail to the south, not toward home. A long hook brings a man out of a circle. I did not stop to drink until I hit a line of scrub that hid me from the bowl completely. Then I took 2 small pulls and breathed through my nose until the taste of dust faded. I looked at the schedule again and memorized the order. Someone else had built a map to hunt me. I would use that same map to step around the traps. By dusk, I reached a ravine near the bunker and took the low path in. Megan opened the hatch and did not speak until the bar slid back into place. She listened while I laid out the paper on the table. She put one finger on the word hub and did not move it. She asked if I had a cost. I showed her a scrape along my forearm where stone had taken skin, and a bruise on my upper arm from where a man had caught me with the side of a rifle. She put a hand on my face and held it. That was the cost that mattered more. I did not say that out loud. Grant finished tightening a clamp and turned the cabinet on and off twice to check the hum. The tone stayed level. He told me the door still whistled. I said I would pour more sealant into the sleeve once I could spare the heat for the weld. He said cold air will make the metal sing whether I want it or not. He was right. Some things you live with. We ate and ran the radio for our window. Ivy chimed the ritual. 3 short, 1 long, 2 short. Good. I sent 1 short in reply. 10 minutes later, a different voice tried a soft bait. Medical for trade, safe road, count of heads. It asked for my band. I turned the set off and waited. Megan sat with her hands folded and watched the door. She was building a list in her head. Rubber, belts, filters, antibiotics, wire, doors. She did not need to say it. I already had the same list. The cold storage annex sat 3 valleys over under an old slaughterhouse. The slaughterhouse roof had caved in years earlier, and a tree grew through a window frame. Men with nerves tuned to food would check a place like that too early after the fall and die in front of it. Now the flies did not even visit. That made it interesting again. The ledger said cleared. The schedule said a crew would pass in 3 days. I went the next morning. I took the long back path and crossed 2 small streams to throw off scent and sound. Infected lined the first stream, slow and water-swollen, shoulders rolling as they pushed through brush for no reason except decay. I let them move. Noise would bring more. The second stream cut into rock. I stepped stone to stone and stayed dry. By noon, I reached the slaughterhouse yard. Burned rubber smell hung low under the sweet stink you never forget once it has settled into your nose. I checked the shadows for movement and then hopped a low wall. Inside the main floor, a set of metal stairs dropped to a lower level. I stood on the top step and listened. Air systems sometimes carry the sound of a man trying to be quiet from far down a run. If you stand still and open your mouth a little to let your jaw relax. The air here just hissed and did not speak. I went down. At the bottom, a heavy door stood ajar with a broom handle wedge set as a stopper. I did not touch the handle. It was too neat. I crouched and looked under the door. The gap was clean, no line, no cord. I pressed the edge with my shoulder and eased it wider. The hinge made a thin metallic cry, and then went quiet. My lamp washed a room with metal shelves along 2 walls and a rolling cart in the center. This was not a bunker. It was a depot. The shelves had been sorted by a careful hand. Boxes of syringes, gauze, lidocaine ampules, antibiotic packets in small foil, a crate of seed tins, a stack of manuals bound with a belt. Along the far wall, an inverter case identical to ours, 2 charge controllers, and under them a box marked with a battery brand name I had not seen since year 1. I checked the corners before I took a step. Good habit. The near corner held a small pen made of welded rebar. Inside, 2 infected crouched in a way that told me someone had starved them as a warning device. A string ran from the pen to the doorstop. The line was tied to a tin can full of screws. If the door moved too far, the can would fall, and the infected would crash into the bars and ring the room. I cut the string near the pen and eased the can to the floor. The infected turned their heads at the sound and sniffed. The smell of my sweat drew them in. I waited and then slid past with the door wedged at the exact distance that left the can sitting. I packed fast and precise. 2 manuals, 1 charge controller, a small box of filters, 2 vials of lidocaine, a roll of rubber hose. I opened the battery box. It held 2 forklift cells. Heavy. Too heavy to move alone in 1 trip without a cart. I rolled the cart to the stairs and stopped. The steps would rattle when the cart touched. I took 1 cell out and laid it on a folded tarp. I slid it up 1 step at a time on the tarp, using the tarp as a sled. It groaned but did not scream. At the top, I paused to listen. The yard was not quiet anymore. A truck door slammed somewhere out by the road. I lowered my pack to the floor and leaned the sled into the shadow behind a broken wall. Footsteps moved across gravel. Calm footsteps. No hurry. It sounded like men who know a place well. I crouched and held still. Two men walked into the slaughterhouse through the wide door that faced the road. The first wore a cap and a jacket with a patch that had been cut off. The second carried a clipboard with a single sheet of paper. The calm was wrong for random scavengers. I slipped a mirror out and angled it. The first man had a scar that ran across his jaw in a straight line, not a jagged cut. Knife work. The second checked a note, looked at the floor, and then nodded to the stairs. Footsteps came from outside again. A third man entered and took a position watching the road with the confidence of someone who had done that before. The two went down the stairs. They did not bang into the door. They knew the hinge. The can did not fall because I had disabled it. That meant I would not get a free alarm if they did something dumb. I eased back through a gap in the wall and moved along the side to a second set of stairs that dumped into the same level at the far end. I descended 3 steps and stopped. Voices. The man with the cap told the other to reset the pen line and to count the filters. The second replied with a number I did not trust for accuracy. He cut the string he found cut and tied another. I made a note. He tied wrong. The can would fall when the door closed, not when it opened. That mistake would be my mistake to clean later. The truck outside idled. I kept my profile low and slid into a dark cut where a pipe had been removed years ago. I watched the top of the stairs and the rolling cart I had not moved out of sight. The man with the cap came up and saw it. He looked at the floor and followed a smear I had missed. He walked in my direction. The third man shifted his stance at the door and scanned. I eased backward into the pipe cut and placed the lever rifle along the edge. The cap stepped into my line. He did not see me. He opened his mouth to call the second man. I touched the trigger once and put the round into the shoulder seam of his jacket. He fell into the wall and slid. The third man at the door swung toward the sound and fired a short burst into the dark. Chips fell from the wall above me. I rolled left and fired once at the flash. The third man fell. The second man on the lower level froze. He did not come up. He whispered something into a handset and then went silent. I slid out of the pipe cut and crossed to the stairs at a low run. I pulled the door down hard so the can fell. The infected hit the pen bars with a dull roar, and the sound rolled through the room. The second man panicked and tried to open the wrong door. He hit the handle. The wedge bit. The door did not move. He cursed loud. He fired at the pen and made the infected louder. I used that noise to move. I tossed a smoke pellet down the stairs. He fired into the smoke. I waited. When the round stopped, I went down 3 steps, slid the rifle around the rail, and put one blind round into the lower frame where his knee would be if he hugged cover. He screamed and dropped the pistol. I went down the last steps and kicked his weapon away. He tried to reach for the can string with his left hand. I stomped his wrist, grabbed him by the collar, and dragged him away from the pen. I did not spend time tying him. I pushed him into the empty shelf and moved to the boxes. I hauled the second forklift cell onto the tarp and pulled. The man whimpered. He would live. I did not need to count bullets for him. I hauled both cells to the truck and laid them behind the broken wall. I loaded the controller, filters, hose and vials into my pack and 2 sacks. I walked out into the yard and looked at the road. A figure stood at the bend and watched with hands at his sides. He did not aim a gun. He did not shout. He just looked at me. The distance was too far for a sure shot with irons and too public for a miss. His face looked calm, older than me. Grey hair at the temples. Scar on the cheek I had not seen before, shaped by a knife blade, clean. He stood with a slight tilt, like someone who carries a hurt in the ribs and does not want to show it. He did not wave. He did not turn. He watched as if he were recording the way I moved. The Warden. I knew that stance the second I saw it. I did not raise the rifle. I watched the road for movement around him. None. He did not come closer. He did not leave. He held eye contact at that distance, in a way that told me he wanted a conversation without words. I broke the line of sight first. I hoisted 1 battery cell and 1 sack, and moved straight into the brush where a path cut toward the creek. I did not run. Running makes brush talk and tells a man where to shoot. I walked with purpose and left a false trail in one spot where old deer prints crossed a patch of bare dirt. I looped and doubled back twice and changed directions near the creek where the stones break scent. I came home long after dark with 2 loads, not 3. The third would have to wait. Megan met me at the hatch with a light and no questions. We carried the battery inside with a line and 2 pulleys. Grant stepped in and checked the label and nodded like a man watching a child he expected to be carried out suddenly arrive under power. He checked the charge controller and smiled with his mouth closed. He said this would smooth power cuts when clouds rolled over, and the fans would be grateful. I believed him. I told Megan about the man at the road. She said the warden had been moving pieces on a board long before our valley knew his name. She said a man like that trains the other men to keep a distance and watch the smallest thing a target does, and then he learns twice, once from them and once from his own eyes. I said the man looked hurt but not beaten. She said good. Pain makes some men careful. Pride makes some men stupid. We would find out which one he was. We split the salvage into piles. Medical to the shelf, hose to the drawer, rubber to the bin, manuals to the map table. I slid 1 manual to Megan and kept 1 for myself. We marked pages with notes for our cabinet. She wrote down belt sizes on the back cover and tucked the pencil into the binding. We did not touch the vials. Those are for real trouble only. At dusk, Ivy's ritual hit the band again. Clean. I tapped once and went dark. 10 minutes later, the calm voice returned with a different pitch. The words were shorter. The tone carried a small rattle of pain or anger. I turned the set off and set my watch for first light. The hub entry on the schedule circled in my head until sleep came on its own. The Civil Defense Hub was not on a public map. The ledger and the schedule hinted at it. 2 margin notes linked a set of power drawers that only a hub would need. A dead rail tunnel ran under the ridge south of the bombed base. A maintenance shaft had once connected that tunnel to a small operations post. Operations posts grow into hubs if money and fear collide in the right office. I checked the ridge twice on foot before midday, and then went in along the old rails with my pack small and my gear quiet. The tunnel mouth had been blown in the first year, but the blast did a poor job. A man with a shovel and time could dig a man-sized crawl along the left wall. Someone had. The dirt was packed and half dry, not fresh, not ancient. I slid in on my side and pushed with my heels. The crawl reached an access hatch half buried in spoil. The hatch handle had been greased within the last week. I wiped the grease with a rag so the smell would not carry, and worked the wheel 1 notch at a time. The steel moaned once, and then yielded. Inside, a narrow stair rose into a room with a bank of old equipment racks along one wall and a folding table in the center with a ledger book larger than the one at home. A man sat at the table with a pencil in his hand and a band around his arm that read medic in faded letters. He was not a medic. He was a dispatcher. His eyes were red from screens and lack of sleep. He looked up when the hinge creaked in the stair and exhaled like someone had finally showed up for a shift. He did not reach for a weapon. One sat under the table within reach. He kept his hands on the ledger and watched me. I told him I needed the logs and the schedules. He asked which ones. His voice was worn down, not brave, not cowardly. I said all of them. He said the hub served people who would die without a coordinator. He said he had sent warning calls to farm sites and to 3 groups that would have been hit by foraging crews if he had not moved them. He said he had also told men who make order where to find mouths that would eat too much through winter. He said the world runs on math when food gets thin. He said my eyes told him I already understood that. I told him I know ration math. I told him I also know men who use ration math as a mask for cruelty. I moved to the racks and saw the coax line that ran to a feed on the roof. The line shone with fresh tape. I followed it to a patch panel and found the junction that linked to a second room. I pulled the patch and pocketed it. The equipment fans dipped. The room got quieter. The dispatcher watched me with the face of a man who knows he is losing more than a job. He did not reach for the weapon yet. I slid the thumb drive into a port on a surviving machine and began a dump. The machine clicked and wheezed. Old drives live when the room is dry, and a man does not slap the rack when a cable sticks. I breathed slow and watched the progress count crawl across a small screen that should have retired a decade ago. The dispatcher spoke again. He asked if I would leave some of the system intact. He said the Warden will harvest whatever I break, but some of these people use the relay to find a safe track around the worst roads. He said I had no reason to trust him. He said he still had a reason to ask. I told him I would cut the ties to the Warden's channel and leave a short-range whisper that a desperate man could use with a wire and a car battery if he knew the code. I told him I would also cut logs, wipe names, and pull maps. He looked at the ledger like it was a pet he had kept alive through winter. He slid it toward me and said, "Take it then." He did not try to grab the gun. He had weighed chances and not liked the result. I flipped the ledger. Lines listed movements, not people. A mark beside Unit Sigma repeated across 3 pages, each entry pointing to a set of dates that ended with today. The transfer note meant the Warden would converge here before dusk with a small team. I copied the pages I needed with my phone camera and then tore them out anyway. No half measures. I put the rest of the ledger back where the man had placed it. He watched my hands and then looked away. Shame is stronger than rage in some men when the job falls apart. The dump reached the mark I needed. I pulled the drive and disconnected the coax completely. The room went from a hum to a whisper. The dispatcher rubbed his eyes. He asked what I would do with the logs. I said I would set up decoy schedules and broadcast them with enough power to pull Echo 4 into empty fields. He nodded once. He said, "Be careful, because Echo 4 kills prisoners." He said his boss did not. The word boss told me he meant the Warden. I said I already understood the difference. I told him to step away from the table and keep hands clear. He did. I slid his gun across the floor and kicked it toward the stair. He watched it slide and did not bend. Good choice. I told him to leave the room and go to the lowest level and wait for an hour. I said if he left before that, he might run into men who would not like his choice to let me pull the cable. He understood. He walked to the stair and disappeared. I did not trust him. I checked the lower door with a mirror after he went through. He had obeyed and sat on the steps with his head in his hands. I started cutting the lines. 1, then 2, then the main. The bolt cutters bit, and the last lights on the far rack went out. The room got dark enough that my headlamp created a tunnel of white. I stuffed the patch cables into my pack and took a photo of the rack layout. I set 2 decoy schedules on white paper in a plastic sleeve and left them on the table with a fake stamp I had copied from a permit years ago. The papers called 2 Echo 4 crews to a farm road far from any living site and 2 hours apart. If they shared notes, they would waste a day. If not, they would waste 2. Every small delay counts. I heard the door on the upper stair open. Voices came small and then filled the room as boots crossed the threshold. Not many. 3, maybe 4. The medical bandman looked up from the lower steps and went still. One voice matched a cadence I knew. The Warden, calm, flat, controlled. He asked for a status. A second voice gave a lie. The system was fine. The man had not noticed the cut patch yet. The Warden walked to the table and saw the decoy schedules. He did not touch them. He reached for the rack and found a dead socket. He did not raise his voice. He said someone had cut his comms. I slipped into the water run that served as a cooling crawl for the lower level and pulled the grate down behind me just enough to hide my exit. The water lay in a shallow film along the concrete. Cold soaked into my knees and elbows. I moved slow to keep from splashing. Above me, boots ran in 2 directions. One man hit the lower stair and almost stepped on the dispatcher. The dispatcher had moved to obey me. He sat in the corner with his hands visible and said nothing. The man swore and ran back up. The crawl ran under the far wall and opened into a narrow service room with a door that stuck halfway from a twist in the frame. I eased it up and slid through sideways. A vent shaft rose above me with rusted ladder rungs set in the concrete. I climbed, 1 rung at a time, careful to test each before trusting it. 2 rungs broke in my hand. I skipped them and kept moving until warm air hit my face through a cracked grate near the roofline. A pry bar mark on the grate told me someone had come this way earlier this week, probably the dispatcher on an errand. I worked the grate and eased my pack through and slid into a small utility room that opened onto brush. I did not run. I moved through the brush and kept low. I circled half the ridge and then cut into an old service road to put gravel between my track and grass. I did not look back until I reached a hawthorn tree that I knew would hide me if I needed to turn and fire. I looked then. No one followed. The ridge sat quiet except for 2 crows that rose and circled, and then landed again on a dead pole. I listened for engines. None. The warden would keep the hub quiet for a day as he learned what I had cut. I reached home past dark. Megan had set a small pot of water and the last of the greens aside. She had also cleaned a space near the panel for the charge controller I had brought from the depot. Grant had bolted it in and run the first set of wires. The room hummed with a smooth tone my body recognized, even before my ear did. The air felt cleaner when the controller did not hunt through clouds. He spoke 2 words. It holds. That was enough. I told Megan about the dispatcher. I said he was not a monster. He was a functionary who thought order erased guilt. She said functionaries add up. She said a dozen honest clerks can move more harm than one loud man if their pens work in a line. She choked on the words and stopped herself. She does not like the part of her mind that grew sharp this late in life. I do not either. We accept it anyway. I set the thumb drive on the table and backed it up to a second stick. I showed Megan the decoy schedules and the pages about Unit Sigma. She read in silence. She tapped the word transfer pending and looked at me. I could see the war in her face. She wanted me to burn the page and forget the code. She wanted me to find it and kill it. Those 2 wants live in the same chest in a world like this. I said we would move on it only when the weather let us, and when our house could breathe without me for days. She nodded and did not argue. She switched the topic to food and ration numbers and planned the next 3 days with a pencil. I slept fewer hours than I needed and woke before dawn with the taste of dust in my mouth. The bunker air had a new sound that told me the controller had evened out the draw while clouds rolled past. Small winds matter. I took a cup of hot water and sat by the door, listening to the whistle. It had dropped in tone with the colder air. The welds creaked once as the metal settled. Nothing new. I checked the upper vent camera. No movement. The slope held. Megan marked the map with 2 circles, one around B12, one around R3. She said we would loop those today and tomorrow. Not to fight, to finish the mission. She said we would plant the ritual in both places and leave instructions for anyone who took over after Ivy's boy healed, and after Grant felt safe leaving the panel for a few hours to help with a bearing swap at R3. That was her telling me we were passing the torch without speeches. We walked out together and split at the north fence. I took the line to B12. She took a cross path to check our water catch. Grant stayed with the inverter and the door and his hand near the panel in case the new belts barked. I went light again. Rifle, pistol, bolt cutters, 1 small spool of wire, 2 strips of cloth for flags no one would see unless he knew where to look. At B12, the door had not moved. The chain alarms lay where I had left them, still and quiet. I walked the perimeter inside and counted steps between points so I could move blind if I had to in the future. I set a small tin with a folded note behind the lower rack leg where dust would hide it. The note explained the ritual in clean, short lines. It told a future person how to call for help without calling wolves. It gave the word that Ivy and I had picked, written once and then crossed out with a single line, so it would take work to read. I tied 1 cloth strip under the workbench in a knot that said this place was not abandoned. I left a small bag of seed tins and 1 wrapped medical kit in a bolt hole under the stairs. I locked the bottom latch and filed the keyway with a quarter turn, so the right key would still work but a wrong one would stick and tell me who had tried. Then I left the door as I found it and brushed my prints away with a scrap of cloth I would burn later. The walk to R3 took most of the day. I moved in a zigzag to watch the road without being on it. A broken billboard gave me a view of the farm from the east. 2 figures worked near the silo. Ivy moved in an efficient line, not wasting motion. The boy sat and watched with a carved stick in his hand. That meant the ankle still hurt, but the mind was working. Good sign. I gave the call we had agreed on when I reached the cover. She answered with a single click. I dropped down and found the room cleaner than before. She ran the place like someone who knew every step matters. She handed me 2 used dressings wrapped tight so flies could not find them, and asked if I had oil for a squeaky hinge. I did. Small needs like that tell me a place is human again, not a cage. We set the ritual in writing and hid it as at B12. We talked about food math. She had 6 weeks of staples if no guests arrived, and the boy's ankle healed on schedule. She had filters for 6 months. She needed belts and a bearing for the lower fan within a month. I said I would bring them when I passed next, or I would send Grant if he felt safe. She nodded, and then surprised me. She asked if she could move one family from a burned farm into the lower rooms if they showed up at dusk with the right word. She did not want to become a leader. She wanted someone to share tasks. I said yes with one condition. She would not say my name to anyone who came. She gave me a look that said I should not have had to ask. I apologized. We shook hands once. The boy watched and then smiled without teeth. He would grow into a man if the world allowed. On the way out, the sound of a motorcycle drifted along the road. 2 bikes, light frames, quiet pipes, scouts. I dropped behind a berm and waited. The riders passed without looking in. That told me the road still belonged to no one, but eyes were starting to shift this way. I did not like that math. I reached home at dusk. Megan had repaired a leak in the greenhouse roof with a piece of cut plastic she had scavenged from a road sign years earlier. The patch grabbed and held. She showed me a small cache she had buried under a false stump at the far clearing. Inside, 2 vials, 1 runner of hose, and a note printed in block letters that told a reader what to do with the radio if a man named Jack never came again. She said if my run for Unit Sigma ended wrong, this would tell someone decent how to keep the air moving for winter. That is love in a world like this. Grant had a slight smile when I stepped into the inverter space. He had replaced the small bearing in the fan and greased the sleeve. The wine that had drifted through the nights for months had died. The air felt balanced. He held up a belt he had cut from an old truck tire and sanded to fit. Ingenious. He said it would not last forever. Nothing does. It would give us time to find the right part. We ate, and then spread the maps and the ledger and the copied pages from the hub on the table. We marked the places we had freed and the places we had stripped. We marked the places we would never touch because the ground there drinks men. We drew a thin line to a spur that could lead to Unit Sigma. I said not yet. Winter would decide the pace. The Warden would push while he still could before snow. We would meet him at times, and places we chose. Megan leaned back and let out a breath that sounded like a decision. She said we were not heroes. We were a household. We would protect what we loved and help where the rules made it safe. No speeches. Work. At full dark, the radio woke with a soft crackle. A voice came through and said my name again. Calm, no threat. The Warden spoke as if none of the last month had happened. He said I had hurt his plan. He said he respected that and hated it. He said the ledger taught me to move like him. He said we would cross paths again at a place with no name on a road no map used anymore. He said I could spend the rest of my life shutting doors, or I could open one and let order inside. He said the dirt does not vanish. You just choose where it piles. He closed with a line of numbers I recognized as a time, and then cut the set. Megan looked at me as if to ask whether I would answer. I did not. I stood and turned the dial to a dead band and let static fill the room for a minute until all the words faded. We shut the lights and listened to the fans. The bunker felt alive, scarred, strong, ours. I stood at the door and pressed my palm flat to the sleeve where the weld meets the frame. The whistle had softened. I could live with it. The map on the table and the ledger under it did not care about sentiment. The numbers would keep moving. I would move with them, not to chase glory, to clean what could be cleaned, strip what must be stripped, and come home. In the morning, I would walk back to the slaughterhouse and drag the last battery cell home. After that, I would sleep 2 nights in a row and fix the hinge on the outer hatch so the seam would not stick in a freeze. Then I would take Grant to R3 with 1 proper bearing and 1 belt, and leave him for 2 days while I mapped the spur that might point to Unit Sigma. If winter cut the pass, I would turn back and live with that choice. If it stayed open, I would take 1 more step toward the hub behind the hub. No promises beyond that. Megan lay her hand over mine and left it there. We sat with the maps until the lantern burned low. The noise outside stayed small. No drone, no truck, just wind over dead grass. The night held steady. For now, the bunker was ours. The war carried into tomorrow whether we waited or not. I chose movement. I would do the job, strip the poison, and come home. Then I would do it again. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening till the end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you. What moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel, especially with extra membership. Carlos Herrera, Luca Mod, Jadala, The Great Anywho, Madam Midnight. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares signing off.